Good evening. My name is Deaconess Bonnie Zimmerman. Welcome to Bethesda Cathedral, the House of Mercy. We are so glad that you decided to join us tonight. But before we get started, I need you to do one thing. Please like and share. Share this broadcast with your friends and family. We would be so grateful if you would do that. Now, typically May is set aside for Financial Awareness Month, as well as Older Americans Month. But our pastor felt led for us to discuss a subject that has touched many lives, all of us at one time or another, and that is the subject of grief. We are so honored that tonight we have an expert in this field who is going to help us navigate through this. He is a grief counselor. His name is Dr. Willie Cameron. Dr. Cameron, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, first of all, I'm an old man, so I fit right in. So originally from Mississippi, been here since 1999. Me and my wife, Lisa, she speaks more than I do. Been married, got 3 sons, one of the daughter, but unfortunately that's it. I got a granddaughter, so my favorite, to be honest. But I've been doing this type of work really since 1999. I started when I came to Atlanta. I worked in the Federal Bureau of Prison, where I work with inmates. I also have a private practice, so I work with healthy people. I get more reinforcement. It is what it is. So when it comes to grief and loss, I think it's something that we all have to experience. And myself, quite a bit of loss. So that's why I really think this is really important, because we tend to suffer in silence, and that's not okay, because we all go through this, and it's a part of life. Death is a part of life. So I think that me and my wife Lisa, we took on this mission because she's dealing with some losses also, and this is very important to me. So that's why I'm here.
Well, thank you. So we're going to get started, and initially we want to find out, how does grief or loss typically impact someone's faith journey, and discuss some ways of how to navigate through that?
Well, it could be a strength, and it could be a struggle. I mean, a lot of the times I deal with people who are angry at God. They say, God, why me? I did everything you told me to do. I went to church, pay my tithes. Why me? I asked them, well, why not you? So we talk about, it depends on if it's something that basically you can find meaning in. When you get mad at God, which I have been before in my life, because I've done with a lot of losses, and I ask people, well, are you mad at God? I know, how's that working for you? I know it's not, but I ask them anyway. It's not working for you. So it depends on, and it's more than if you're saved or not, how far along your spiritual journey. And a lot of people get mad at God, and now they can't turn to God and praise Him, because how can you praise somebody that you think is punishing you? The Job analogy, So it depends on your relationship with God and how you look at grief and loss. That's going to determine, I think, your thought processes. If you're mad at God, you can't heal.
That's true.
So you got to get over that. And I tell people, if you're mad at God, that might be a conversation you have with your pastor. I direct you to your pastor about that. So I incorporate a lot of, spirituality into how I do my work.
Very good. It's needed.
Thank you.
Dr. Cameron, what emotions are often the hardest for people to process during grief? And what methods would you recommend for working through them?
Guilt. So I dealt with a client that maybe her husband had a stroke, and before he could go home, he had to use the bathroom. So she forced him to use the bathroom. He died of an aneurysm. So now she's guilty. See, I killed him. No, you didn't kill him. You did exactly what the doctor told you to do. So now the process, that guilt. And a lot of these unhealthy emotions are the reason why we have trouble getting back to a state of positive mental health, because of guilt. Anger, again, being mad at God. I've had people that are mad at my husband. I'm like, why? Because he left me. And your husband died of cancer? He didn't have that choice to leave you. I'm thinking, despair. Where do I go now? Especially older couples that have been married and failure to thrive as far as now you've been married for 40 years, now you're by yourself. Despair is one. And hopelessness. Well, I'm not married anymore. Why should I live? I mean, so these are all emotions to process. And they're all healthy emotions. I tell people you feel what you feel, but you have to process them. And that's a big P word for mental professionals. That means process and add some thought to it. It depends on the situation. But again, it goes back to the best method to process these negative emotions. I hate to say negative, is to admit to them. You're angry. Well, who are you angry at? A lot of people say, well, I shouldn't be mad at God, but you are. And some people don't want to say, I'm mad at God, but you are. And it stops them from growing. So the best way, this is going to sound interesting coming from a mental professional, but understand I'm also a man of God also. So best method, prayer, spiritual prayer, meditation, rituals, ceremonies. Instead of going through the bereavement about loss, what can you remember about this person? Yeah. Celebrate their life versus mourning their death, because we all going to die one day. That's the analogy I use. People don't want to hear that, but we all going to die one day. And and I even share, when I do therapy, especially with couples who lost most time their husband, I tell them I hope that I go before Lisa, because I don't think I can function without her. So that's the honesty in it. And we recently dealt with a loss. What happens with that is now we begin to talk about, Lisa, when you're not here anymore, or when you're dead, how do you want me to deal with your death? She wants to be planted in the ground, buried. Okay, where's the burial insurance at? So I don't mind cremate me and go on a vacation, whatever. And unfortunately, that conversation happens after death.
Right.
It's important to know your last wishes. Don't spend that money on a funeral. $8,000 to $10,000. Go on a vacation, enjoy yourself, because the time we had is the time we had. Now it's time for us, to continue to live. And like I say, every relationship is going to end, whether they leave you or they die. So again, all these emotions are very powerful, and I think as a therapist, I process them. I say whatever you feel is whatever you feel. Like I said, anger, and then when we talk about stages of grief, denial is one, anger is one. They can even be resented. They can have resentment about God or the person who's died. And then what I do is like, okay, I process that resentment. Okay, you say he left you, and I go back to again, he died of cancer. I'm pretty sure if he had his wish, he would be here with you. So it's whatever you feel, it's whatever you feel, and that's okay.
Good points. Good points. I can remember those stages of death from nursing school, and once you experience it for yourself, you see it's not just textbook. You really do go through those emotions.
I know it's hard to tell, but my brother died last Wednesday. So
this past Wednesday.
Oh yeah, well, last Wednesday. So his funeral was Saturday, and even when I said that, it's okay. Even when I said that, the proper aspect of grief came to the surface. That's completely okay. So at the funeral Saturday, but you continue to move on with life.
Yes.
Now, Lisa's forced me to go on a vacation. I'm like, okay, I probably need a vacation. But it's important to be honest with people and the pain that we go through when we lose a loved one.
Yes.
So it's not going to go away. We have to process it. And even as I almost started to cry, I'm like, that would be okay too. So now this is important. And especially for men. Men tend to try to be emotionless.
Yeah.
And keep it inside. That keeping it inside is going to hurt your relationship, because, again, we have to be emotionally vulnerable. And even doing this so close to the death is important for me, because I'll rest. But again, it's important to allow your emotions to come when they come. And you have to know, how do you go through bereavement? Mine is more or less my body tights up. I go through physical pain, and then I begin to cry. And I cry when I walk. And also the sweating is good because it gets the bad hormones out of you. So with men, we keep it inside. We become angry, do all type of crazy stuff. I just say crazy because we don't know how to deal with emotions, unfortunately, because we're taught not to be emotional.
Right.
So yeah. So like I said, if I want to share this, a lot of people want to know, because as a mental professional, I know what to do. It's just being consistent about it. Yeah. So.
Thank you for that. Can you tell us what ways the faith community can effectively support individuals who are grieving? What can the faith community do?
What I would say is be non-judgmental. A lot of times when we deal with emotions, you might hear, well, they need a better relationship with God. I think that is true, but not everybody is on that plane just yet. You're just listening, be non-judgmental, and try to be helpful whenever possible. But also it's important to talk about positive mental health. I think a lot of what we're told is that, hey, you shouldn't seek out a professional. You shouldn't seek out somebody that's an atheist. They're going to take you down the road you don't want to go. But I think to be non-judgmental and try not to help too quickly. It's important to learn how to sit in your grief. It's uncomfortable. You're going to want to run. But you might notice when I sit there with it, I kind of calm myself down. It's not going to go away, but you sit there with it because it's necessary. Grief is actually pretty healthy. You should be going through grief and bereavement when you lose a loved one. So when people try to get over it quickly, and not go through it, that's when they harm themselves. Then that's what complicated grief comes into play. Instead of and there's no time period for it, but they say roughly about 3 months, you're not over it, but you should be better. Unless you're stuck there and you don't try to go through the process. Now you're stuck and people be going through bereavement 20 years later. I'm like, that's a long time to go through bereavement. Because unfortunately, somebody else is going to die within 20 years. Now you're dealing with multiple losses. So I guess be non-judgmental.
Okay, then. Can you tell us how prayer and worship contribute to healing trauma? From your perspective, how would prayer and worship play a part in healing?
The funny thing is, we as Christians, we already knew this, but it took us a psychologist to do research. So when we pray, dopamine is released. We feel better, we feel calm. We say spirit, that's dopamine being released, and now you feel safe, you feel calm. You pull at least the garment of praise. That's difficult when you're going through bereavement because you want to say, why me? I tell a lot of people, go help somebody else. You won't get caught up in your bereavement because, and what I don't hear a lot of testimonies, and that's pretty much sharing your narrative. That helps somebody say that this too you can get over. So again, when we pray, dopamine is released. We feel better about it. We're calm. The spirit is with us. Meditating also does the same thing, but it also creates a psychological well-being. We know that. Now research says this happens. I'm like, okay, you just justified something that most people already know. So put on that garment of praise is really important. But when we say it, it's difficult to do it in the moment.
Yeah.
So we've got to be reminded to do that.
Okay. It's interesting what you said, that it's not only when you pray, you have the spiritual aspect, but there's also a physiological response, dopamine, that's released. So that's interesting. Can you give us some practical ways of how we can create safe spaces for open and honest conversations about grief and loss? Because sometimes people are reluctant to share. They don't feel that they're in a safe space to share about their grief and loss because, sometimes people say, well, you should be over that by now.
There you go.
So how can we do that,
That's the first thing we never say. You should be aware of that by now. So to be open, non-judgmental, in that safe place, again, is to be able to listen and be there with that individual. So when I had my moment, you guys were there with me. Sometimes you can't do anything to help that person, but just be there with them. What that's like is try not to come up with any type of this is what I did to deal with that.
Oh.
Yeah, that's kind of, that lets them know that you're uncomfortable. You sit there with them, and that silence. And if they break down, they break down. When I tell people, I give them tissue in my office. I said, not to stop crying, but I don't want you to have the snarl over your clothes. But you still need to cry.
Right.
Yeah, and it's important to be authentic. But what we do a lot, before we find out the narrative, I think it's important to go to scripture, but we got to find out what the narrative really is. That's active listening. And that's just letting them process what they got to process. If they cry, and it's okay. Because when you tell people it's okay, don't cry, guess what? It makes it worse. So we got to be okay with sharing that moment of intimacy with a person. And understand that you can't do anything. There's nothing you can say to make them feel better, and that's completely okay. So to just be there with them and not be uncomfortable. We got to work on not being uncomfortable when somebody share, I'm still suffering with this and that. And it's okay. I mean, we go with a time frame in psychology, but it depends on the person. There is no time frame. I tell them you over when you're over it, but you got to deal with the loss. A lot of it is creating a new relationship with the person who's not here anymore. Now, some therapists, until they find out better, they say, have a conversation with your loved one, but we're not supposed to talk to the dead. So when you tell a person that, you're like, if somebody tells you that, tell them, we're not supposed to talk to the dead because they might not know. So again, you celebrate life, but I think it's to be open to being uncomfortable when people are suffering.
Okay, I would just to piggyback on that, I think that is something that we have to work on. Sometimes seeing somebody grieving, seeing somebody crying, somebody really visibly upset, it can make the person that's with them uncomfortable. You don't know what to say to them. So we have to work on being comfortable around their grief and their reaction to their grief. So
even some young therapists, somebody going through bereavement, they ask me, you want a hug? I'm like, stop it. You need a hug. That's something you're going through.
Right.
Yeah, so it's because people were kind of, if they know what they need, they'll tell you. Sometimes I'm ask, is there anything I can do for you right now? And most of the time I don't know. I just said, just be here. And that's difficult because, again, so now that might bring about our grief and loss that we didn't process or come to closure with.
Good point. Good point. And to that point, I would say that sometimes what you said about people being uncomfortable around people that are grieving, I think sometimes that's when things that are said that aren't improper or,
Well, it is that's
well-meaning, but
well-meaning. Yeah, and it's understand there's nothing you can say to make them feel better, and that's okay. You just let them cry. Lisa don't like for people to cry, so she wants to hug them. I'm like, baby, stop hugging people. You got to be okay with sharing their pain. That's the key.
Good.
Self be still. You want to resolve it. We can't resolve it. And that's okay, but we can be there with them. And in the end, they come back and say, thank you for being there with me. Because when you grieve alone, that's when that's when it's more difficult. That's when the devil put all type of stuff in your head.
Sure.
When you're by yourself.
Yes, sir.
And let me say this. For some people go through bereavement and they use drugs and alcohol. I also specialize in substance abuse. Drugs and alcohol actually stop us from healing. And so weed, marijuana, some people might take that just to cope with it. But like I tell them, I had one client in my office, she went through bereavement and she was off marijuana and she cried from the inside. When they cry from the inside, that's those tears that the drugs stop you from sharing, because drugs, what they do is they numb your emotions.
Right.
You're not able to feel the pain. It is what it is. You have to be able to really feel this in order to process and work your way through it. We don't want to feel that, and we get stuck.
Dr. Cameron, can you think of any particular scriptures or spiritual teachings that would tend to bring peace during difficult times, and why might they not be effective at times? You give people scriptures and share these with them, and sometimes they don't seem to be effective.
Yeah, so I'm gonna share a narrative. I work a lot with pastors and first responders, and seeking meaning. So this one pastor said his granddaughter died, and people were coming to him with scriptures. I forgot one he stated, but he didn't want to hear scriptures because he was mad. My granddaughter, I don't want to hear the Bible. This is the pastor talking. So I'm like, wow, that's interesting. And I'm gonna get to why he didn't want to hear that. But Philippians 4:13, I do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's a lot of different scriptures, but it's a tough one though, because again, you gotta really understand that you give it to God. And when you give it to God, see, when we pray, when we give it to God, when we raise off our knees, we didn't truly give it to God. For some reason, we kept it. So because we're emotionally overwhelmed, got too much going on, we question our faith. Why me? Go back to again, question our faith. Why me? And why not you? Don't you have to have a testimony? If you don't have a testimony, how can you help people who are suffering? Why not you? What's the meaning of this suffering? Unresolved pain. These are reasons why the scriptures might not work. But again, a lot of it goes back to we're displeased or we're mad at God. So the scriptures are relevant, but we can't be mad at God. That's why I direct people that, Pastor, you got to resolve that for you to heal. So that's why a lot of scriptures don't work, because you're too involved in your pain.
Okay, then. Yeah. That makes sense. And he was being honest. He was in pain. I respect that, him being honest, that I don't want to hear scriptures. And sometimes your grief and your pain can be so severe, it can be such a traumatic situation that, you hear the scriptures, but they're not being applied to your situation.
Well, you have to say, but you're not there yet.
Right.
Lisa would say, a baby question more mature, you're not there just yet. And a lot of it, we got to understand that if a person's not there just yet, you still got to be there with them. And when they're ready to hear it, they'll hear it.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us some healthy ways people can honor their loved ones, both in death and in significant non-death losses like divorce or estrangement, which has been equated? It is equated to death. So
let me talk a little about non-death situations, which is really important.
Okay.
The divorce. I try to tell the parents, look, you don't have to be with each other anymore, but you got to be responsible parents. And we go back to, let's not say anything negative about the other parent in front of the child. I'm not going to go into a lot of the stuff that parents do when they're mad at the parent and they take it out on the child. So you got to develop a relationship. And when I was working in the prison, there were a lot of inmates that were getting out and going back to the community. And they say, Doc, I hate my wife, but I love my child. Stop. You got to have a relationship with this woman, because she took care of your child for 15 years while you were incarcerated. You got to respect and go to her. You got to go back and you got to ask, is it okay now that I not take control, but be a father to our child? Don't go there and say, I hate her, because again, you're going to say all type of crazy things about her, and you're going to force the child to make a decision. But that's not the way it should go. Divorce is not a bad thing. It's what happens. It's what the adults do after the divorce. So honor. What funerals? I don't know, but man, it's so expensive. Celebrate life. Leave a legacy. Share. My brother's birthday, I might go out and do something nice for somebody.
Okay.
My brother Thomas was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia at such a young age. I might go out, go to a shelter, buy somebody a dinner. He's a very skinny guy, so he wore a lot of nice clothes. I might get a nice pair of pants or whatever to celebrate his style.
Right.
Yeah, stylish little guy. But again, it's celebrate life. Eat his favorite meal. He loved pork. Ain't too much pork, but again, maybe every once in a while. He could because he's skinny. So it's just doing the things that he would normally do, that I'll do, and remembers from him. Like both my parents are deceased. Got a picture of both of them on my chimney. Sometimes I'm like, Mama, talk to Lisa, and I look at Lisa like, Mama, talk to you, something going on. And she has a picture of both of her parents in the house.
Nice.
So again, we talk to them, and people, say that you shouldn't talk, well, it's a picture. It's a remembrance. So I remember when I had the photo albums. Now I go to the phones, photo albums. I like photo albums. Just go to the pictures. Oh, I remember that. Yeah, that was a good time. So celebrate the memories versus the death. It's important.
I agree. I agree. I personally went through a situation where I lost my only brother, and he passed suddenly. And it was hard for me to process that for a while. And somebody wanted to give me a birthday party on the anniversary of his passing a year later. And initially, I refused to do it.
Yeah.
But I thought, what better way to celebrate him? And I knew, he would want that. So that helped me get through that time,
Right.
Even though I was remembering him, but I was surrounded by family and friends, and it really turned out to be a lovely occasion. So I agree with you, celebrating them.
That analogy, give me my flowers while I'm alive.
Yes, sir.
It's really important.
Yes, it is. Can you tell us how individuals or communities can begin to transform pain into purpose? We hear that all the time after a loss. How can you find purpose in your pain?
You got to help somebody else, give them something similar.
Okay.
To take the focus off you, and you be better. It's a distraction, but we need distractions. Like I said, testimonies. But people need to hear testimonies. I think on a consistent basis, because when we do trauma work, I call it share your narrative. When I do trauma work with first responders, we in a circle. It could be up to 15, 25 people, and they share that narrative. That makes people, I'm not alone in this, and then they create that bond. It's trauma bonding. But again, sharing your narrative. And we're talking about some really horrendous stuff. And then the people, they think, man, I thought I was going through something. Wow. Yeah, and you realize that unfortunately there's always somebody in a worse situation. But it's to share your narrative and be open about it. And whatever emotion you're feeling about it, it's important to put out there. You got to process, the key is to process those emotions. And I ask people, well, you process this? They say, yeah, I talked about it. No, have you processed it? Talked about the emotions and the thoughts that come along with this. Now, certain loss can also be trauma because you weren't expecting that, but also when I say pre-death, when we got a loved one that's dealing with cancer, they hadn't died just yet,
Right.
and but in that person's mindset, you just wait for them to die. That's a terrible place to be. And some people say, well, I thought I would be good, but when it happened, I wasn't. I'm like, you can't plan for that. When it happens, it happens. But it goes back to being available for people. And we get out of our heads by helping other people.
That's good.
And it's a part of healing too.
Works both ways. Can you discuss with us some healthy ways to cope with grief when you feel like you're losing your faith? How do you cope with grief? And sometimes people will say, well, you're a strong Christian, or you believe in God, and they kind of attack your faith or question your faith.
I go back to the Job analogy. Yeah. I think when people do that, you look at the reason why they're doing that. The fear that what am I going to do when I'm tested? Yeah, and we think that just because we're going through bereavement, maybe God is punishing us. So I go back to the Job analogy. I think that it's still those of us who are not going through it quite as bad got to be patient and not be afraid that when I go through it, maybe they might not be there for me. But I ask people, why do you question somebody's faith because they're going through depression, anxiety? Why? Yeah, again, it's that I don't know what to do when I'm going through it. So a lot of it's that fear I think people respond to. We got to address the fear. We're all going to go through something. That's a part of life.
Yeah.
But we get it consistent. I go back to Job, it's like, well, maybe you did something wrong. No, being a Christian. That's when you say I'm a Christian, when you live a Christian life, you kind of set yourself up to be even killed.
So true.
Unfortunately. So it's to understand that just because you're going through hardship don't mean that again, you're not a good Christian. So I think it's to be open with sharing. The key is again to be non-judgmental of others.
Thank you. That keeps coming up, that theme. Don't judge, don't be judgmental.
That's what the kids tell me. When I get the teens, they're afraid to talk. Well, why are you on the internet talking so much? But that's what they get. Be non-judgmental. Oh, like, are you? Okay. And actually, it's very difficult to be like that. We got to stop. I said, wait a minute. What's going on with me that I'm judging this person? What fear have I not dealt with yet? What trauma I lost have I not dealt with yet?
So you're saying that if, just to use the two of us for an example, if I'm judging you in the way you deal with your loss, it's because of my fear of something that I haven't dealt with in my own life.
Most of the time.
Okay.
And a lot of times we got to pull away that onion to see what exactly is going on, and that's to talk about it. I call it aha effect. And people got to do a self-analysis. What exactly am I stuck with?
Oh.
The years are irrelevant. I deal with people that might go on through bereavement and grief for 15 to 20 years because it's so powerful. I deal with a group of women that lost their sons. That's a tough one. To lose a child. I deal with a group of women that lost their husband. So the research says a child and our mate, those are the most difficult losses to deal with, especially a mate. I mean, so you've been married for 50 years, now all of a sudden you're living by yourself. That's a tough one. But again, most of the time people judge because of some unresolved trauma or fear that they haven't recognized or dealt with just yet. And they might not even know about it.
That's interesting. Okay. Thank you. How can we cultivate resilience during times of hardship, especially when everything seems overwhelming? How do we develop and nurture resilience?
Well, there's this term we use in psychology called post-traumatic growth. Yeah, we get stuck on post-traumatic trauma and all this other good stuff, but post-traumatic growth is fairly new. It comes from this perspective that, hey, maybe what I went through was necessary. And by looking at that, the resiliency is how do you bounce back when you're knocked down, when you don't feel like getting up, when you're just stuck in the mud. A lot of it, unfortunately, sometimes people enjoy stuck in the mud. Just think about it. We were trying to, I had this client, his wife left him, and he had kids, and so his sisters went and cooked food for him. His brothers paid the bills for him. Like, you got to stop that. Because his pain is too productive. Stop paying the bills. Stop cooking for him. He'll get resiliency because if you don't eat, you will die. So a lot of times we do too much and it doesn't foster resiliency. It depends on personality. I prefer to know how I get better, so I prefer to go through the pain.
Okay.
And it's completely okay. It's difficult to watch a person go through pain, but sometimes it's necessary. And the ability to bounce back means we experience something. So a lot of times you got to hands off. Let that person develop resiliency on their own, and not knowing when to get involved, when not to, because you have to foster resiliency. That's a tough one if you're a helper.
Yeah.
You always want to help.
Right.
Sometimes when you help, you can do more damage than good. Yeah. But stand back and just, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but let people suffer. That you have to go through that period of suffering. I call it's raining. I mean, and now you got to get to the rainbow. Yeah. But what might happen with that? A lot of people might become suicidal, which is something we got to talk about. People don't want to talk about that. Suicide. There's been an increase in suicidology, including pastors and mental professionals.
Yes.
I had a client about maybe 10 years ago, her therapist committed suicide. And she blamed herself. I'm like, that's a tough one. Because self-care is very important. That's another thing. Self-care is important with resiliency, because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others.
That's right. That's right. Just to have you explain post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
So in the instance that you were talking about, the gentleman whose wife left, and then his family members came in like the cavalry and were
Yeah.
helping him.
Yes.
So are you saying they were stunting
Yes, ma'am.
his post-traumatic growth?
Yes, ma'am.
That's very
And we get this from, I learned a lot of my work by dealing with the military, so a lot of trauma in the military. So they realize that when you go to a traumatic event, adrenaline is released, and that event is burned into your mind. So they was going to give them an anti-adrenaline shot. The medic was going to do that, and they realized that if we do that, they'll never learn how to resolve trauma and go to post-traumatic growth. That post-traumatic growth means that in order for you to grow, you have to go through this.
Got you.
And growth can be painful. So it goes back to, they thought they was doing a great thing, but just think about it. You don't have to pay any bills. You don't have to cook.
Right.
That's kind of enjoyable. Let me stay here for a minute.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me milk this as much longer as I can. Yeah. And I think if you do that, it should be a certain amount of time that you say, okay, we're going to pull back. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a term I've never heard, so that's very interesting. What we'd like to do now, Dr. Cameron, is ask you, what should an individual look for? What would I look for, or somebody else look for when seeking out a mental health professional, or specifically discussing our topic tonight, somebody to help them navigate through the grief process? What should they look for?
First of all, somebody who's spiritual, not an atheist.
Right.
Somebody who specializes in specific type of trauma. There's this concept called church hurt. That's when something has happened in the church and the person has been traumatized by it. It's not new. It's been around for a while. But okay, I apologize. I got off of that. So I said it because some people don't want to seek help in the church. That's the first thing. But I think the church should have a list of competent referrals in the mental health field, so you can refer this person to somebody who's spiritual, somebody who understands your walk, somebody who understands spirituality, but competent in trauma, competent in malicious trauma, competent in as far as post-traumatic growth. Not every therapist is the same. Not every therapist is qualified, because when it comes to trauma, a lot of therapists are not trauma-informed. Because some losses can be certain losses can be trauma. So you go to a therapist, and they don't know how to deal with your trauma. They're overwhelmed. And every time you tell your trauma, you're traumatizing yourself. So people who specialize in trauma is very important. And again, it's good for the church to have a list of professionals they can refer people to. Hopefully they're in the church, but they don't have to be. It's just somebody that basically understands spiritual awareness and don't operate outside of a person's spiritual belief. Just like some therapists might tell them, talk to your dad one. Wait a minute, you're not supposed to talk to the dad. That's bad advice. Yeah. So somebody that'll listen to you and understand your spiritual walk. That might be difficult because a lot of the training we experience kind of goes against the aspect of, I hate to say God, it is what it is. Yeah. So we got to be careful about that training, understand that, as we grow, we have to have a relationship with God. So somebody who's competent is very important.
And to your point, we definitely need a mental health professional that understands both the clinical and spiritual needs of an individual. So that is very important. You mentioned you mentioned that every time you tell your trauma,
That's called vicarious trauma. Including therapists get that. Even as a client, if you go to multiple therapists, you got to tell your narrative. Every time you tell your narrative about your trauma response, you're traumatizing yourself. Yeah, that's why a lot of people don't want to do trauma work. It's the analogy to say something happened at 7, and now you're 30. So you never process. It's like you got your arm broke at 7. Now you're 30. We got to break it for it to heal correctly. That's trauma work. But like I said, every time you share your narrative with a mental professional, you're traumatizing yourself. That's why you just want to do it once, if possible.
Very good. Well, Dr. Cameron, this has been an eye-opener, very informative session. Thank you so much for sharing with us. It's much needed in the body of Christ and just in our communities people dealing with grief and loss. So we thank you so much for taking the time to share with us.
Okay. Now, if anybody needs to
And how would they, thank you.
Yeah,
How
so-
would they contact you if they needed
So
counseling?
I'm on Psychology Today. You can Google my name and come up, but also my cell phone number is 678-435-7212. And I also operate through a platform called Growth Therapy, where you can actually go on Growth Therapy and book a session with me. But again, you can definitely find me on Psychology Today.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have been really blessed and informed by Dr. Cameron. We hope something was said that will help you navigate and process your grief, trauma. If you would like to contact Dr. Cameron, his information will be on the screen. Once again, remember our theme, continue.